The morning sun peeked through London's famous clouds as Diane stepped out of her taxi near Buckingham Palace. Her platinum blonde hair, cut in a sharp bob, caught the light as she adjusted her large sunglasses. At 47, she believed herself too important to be bothered with the little inconveniences of travel. "Can you believe this weather?" she said loudly to no one in particular, looking up at what locals would consider a perfectly pleasant day. "And that taxi driver, driving on the wrong side of the road like it's normal." A couple nearby exchanged glances, trying not to laugh. This was Diane's first trip to England, but she spoke as if she were an expert on everything British. "Well, at least the palace should be worth it," she sighed, checking her watch. It was already 10:30 a.m., and she had heard the changing of the guard was something you couldn't miss. What she didn't realize was that hundreds of other tourists had the same idea, and many had arrived hours earlier. Diane walked toward the growing crowd, pulling her designer jacket tighter. She had spent nearly $5,000 on this vacation, money that she reminded everyone about whenever something didn't go her way. Back home in Ohio, she was known for asking to speak to managers at the slightest inconvenience. "Excuse me, coming through," she announced, pushing past an elderly couple who had been standing patiently for over an hour. "I need to get to the front." A tall man in a London tour guide uniform gently tried to stop her. "Ma'am, these folks have been waiting quite a while. Perhaps you could—" "Do you know how much I paid to be here?" Diane cut him off, her voice rising. "I didn't fly across an ocean to stand in the back where I can't see anything." People around her went quiet. A little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered something. The mother shook her head and whispered back, "Just ignore her, sweetie." Diane didn't notice or care about the uncomfortable silence she created. She was too busy working her way forward, one elbow at a time. "Excuse me, I need to get through. Coming through." A young woman with her family tried to explain. "There's a system here, you know. We've all been waiting since—" "Well, you should have pushed to the front like me," Diane replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's how you get what you want in life." By now, she had managed to reach the second row of people behind the barriers. From here, she could see the famous guards in their red coats and tall black hats standing perfectly still. Their faces showed no emotion, like statues in uniform. "Is this all they do? Just stand there?" she asked loudly, pulling out her phone. "I thought there would be more action." An older British gentleman nearby sighed. "The changing of the guard hasn't started yet, madam. When it does, you'll see plenty of action, as you call it. It's a ceremony that dates back over 100 years. "Well, they could make it more exciting," Diane replied, taking several selfies with the palace in the background. "And what's with those silly hats? They look ridiculous." A few children giggled at her comments, but their parents quickly hushed them, embarrassed by the loud American woman. As the crowd grew thicker, Diane became more determined. She spotted a small gap at the very front, where a rope barrier separated tourists from the guards' marching path. There was just enough space for one person, and she was going to be that person. "Look at these people," she muttered, scrolling through her phone. "I bet none of them will get decent photos like I will. You have to be aggressive if you want the best shots for social media." She checked her reflection in her phone camera, fixing her lipstick and hair. Back home, Diane had over 2,000 followers on her social media accounts, not famous by any means, but enough people to impress with her vacation photos. This palace guard picture would surely get her at least 100 likes, she thought. "Excuse me," she said to a young couple at the front. "My husband is saving me. A spot right there." She pointed vaguely toward the empty space. "I don't see anyone," the woman replied hesitantly. "He just stepped away to use the restroom," Diane lied smoothly. "He's wearing a blue jacket, tall man, you must have seen him." Confused and not wanting to cause trouble, the couple shifted slightly, creating just enough space for Diane to slip through. "Thank you so much," she said with fake sweetness, quickly claiming her spot before they could object. Now at the very front, Diane had a perfect view. She could see every detail of the guards' uniforms and the gleaming metal of their buttons. The massive palace stretched out behind them, grand and imposing against the cloudy London sky. "Now this is more like it," she said to herself. already planning which filters she would use on her photos. This is the London experience I paid for. What Diane didn't realize was that she was standing dangerously close to the marked path where the guards would soon march. Several signs clearly stated, "Do not obstruct the Queen's Guard and stay behind barriers at all times." But Diane had never been one for reading signs or following rules that didn't suit her. As she settled into her perfect spot, she had no idea that in just a few minutes her entire London experience would take a dramatic turn, one that would make her famous, but not in the way she had hoped. The clock struck 11, and a hush fell over the crowd as distant drums began to beat. The famous changing of the guard ceremony had begun. Diane felt a rush of excitement, finally something happening worth posting about. Around her, families lifted children onto shoulders and tourists raised their phones high. The steady rhythm of marching boots grew louder, and then the first line of guards appeared, their red coats bright against the palace's gray stone backdrop. "Oh my goodness," Diane whispered, genuinely impressed for the first time since arriving in London. The guards moved in perfect unison, faces forward, not a single emotion showing. Their black boots gleamed in the midday sun, and their tall, bare skin hats made them look even more imposing. A friendly-looking security officer in a yellow vest moved along the rope barrier, making sure everyone stayed behind the line. "Please keep behind the rope at all times," he reminded the crowd. "The guards must not be obstructed during their march." Diane barely heard him. She was too busy trying different angles with her phone, frustrated that other tourists' heads and hands kept getting in her shots. "These pictures are terrible," she muttered, looking at her screen. "I need something better, something nobody else will have." That's when she spotted him, a lone guard standing perfectly still at his post, away from the main procession. He stood like a statue, eyes forward, not blinking, the perfect photo opportunity. Even better, there was a gap in the crowd near him. Diane looked around. The security officer had moved further down the line. Everyone else was focused on the main ceremony. This was her chance. "Watch my spot," she said to a startled teenager next to her, not waiting for a response before slipping away. With practiced ease, Diane ducked under the rope barrier when no one was looking. Her heart beat a little faster. She knew she wasn't supposed to cross the line, but rules had always seemed like mere suggestions to her. "It'll just take a second," she assured herself, walking quickly across the open space toward the solitary guard. Behind her, she heard someone gasp. Then a voice called out, "Miss, you can't go there." Diane pretended not to hear. She was already pulling up her camera app, planning the perfect angle. She'd stand right next to the guard, maybe even pretend to make him smile. It would be the highlight of her social media posts. What Diane didn't notice was that a different guard had begun marching directly toward the path she now stood on. This was part of their routine, a carefully choreographed patrol that had been performed the same way for over a century. The security officer in the yellow vest had spotted her and was now moving quickly in her direction. "Ma'am, please return. Behind the barrier immediately." "It'll just take a second," she called back without looking, waving her hand dismissively. "Don't be so uptight." By now, several people in the crowd had noticed what was happening. Some pointed, others whispered, and a few even began recording with their phones. A young boy tugged at his father's sleeve, pointing at Diane. "Dad, that lady's going to be in trouble," the boy said, his eyes wide. His father nodded. "Yes, she certainly is." Diane positioned herself with her back to the open pathway, completely unaware that it was a designated route for the guards. She held her phone up high, trying to get both herself and the stationary guard in the frame. "Perfect," she murmured, adjusting her pose and fixing her hair. "This will definitely get me those likes." From somewhere behind her came the rhythmic sound of boots on pavement, heavy, measured steps growing louder with each passing second. Several people in the crowd tried to warn her. "Miss, move!" called an elderly woman. "Look out behind you!" shouted someone else. Diane barely glanced their way. "Just one more second," she said, still focused on getting the perfect angle for her selfie. The security officer was now jogging toward her, his face serious. "Ma'am, please step aside immediately," he called out more urgently. "You're in the patrol path." "Just one photo," Diane snapped back without turning around, irritated by the interruption. Why is everyone here so dramatic? The crowd had gone surprisingly quiet now, many people holding their breath. Some had their phones pointed not at the ceremony anymore, but at Diane. The marching sound grew louder, closer, more insistent. A little girl in the front row whispered loudly to her mother, "What happens if she doesn't move?" The mother shook her head. "I don't know, honey." The guards never stop. The rhythmic thud of boots was now impossible to ignore, even for Diane. Something about the steady, unwavering approach finally made her pause. She lowered her phone slightly and started to turn her head. What she saw made her freeze. Less than 20 feet away, a royal guard was marching directly toward her. His eyes were fixed straight ahead as if she didn't exist. His face showed no emotion, no hesitation, no sign that he planned to stop or go around her. For the first time since arriving at the palace, Diane felt a flutter of uncertainty. The guard's determined march suddenly seemed less like a tourist attraction and more like a force of nature, unstoppable, unyielding. Surely he'll walk around me, she thought, though less confidently now. The security officer was only steps away, his hand outstretched. "Ma'am, move now." The crowd held its collective breath. Phones recorded. Children stared wide-eyed. The guards' boots struck the pavement with mechanical precision, closing the distance between them with each passing second. And Diane stood frozen in the middle of it all, finally realizing she might have made a terrible mistake. 10 feet away now, the guard's face remained perfectly still, his eyes looking straight ahead as if Diane were invisible. His measured steps never faltered, never slowed. The crowd watched in tense silence. The security officer had almost reached her. "Ma'am, you must move now." 5 feet away. Diane could hear the guard's breathing now, see the slight fog his breath made in the cool morning air. Something about his unwavering approach finally broke through her stubbornness. Okay, she muttered, taking one reluctant step to the side but still keeping her phone up. "I'm moving, but I'm still getting my picture." And that's when it happened. When the guard was just 3 feet away, close enough that Diane could see the polished buttons on his red coat, his deep voice suddenly boomed across the courtyard. "Make way for the Queen's Guard." The command was so unexpected, so powerful that Diane jumped. Her phone nearly slipped from her fingers. This was the first time she'd heard any of the guards speak. Until now, they had seemed more like moving statues than real people. But the guard didn't stop walking. He continued his precise march directly toward her, and Diane realized with growing alarm that he had no intention of walking around her. "You can't be serious," she said, backing up another half step but still not fully clearing the path. "There's plenty of room to go around." The security officer was just steps away now, reaching out to pull her back. "Ma'am, please." The crowd had gone completely silent. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on this unexpected drama unfolding before them. Many had their phones out, recording everything. What nobody knew, not even Diane, was that the man inside that famous red uniform was Private James Harrison. At 26 years old, he had served in the army for 4 years, including 8 tough months in Afghanistan. Before becoming one of the palace guards 18 months ago, he had gone through rigorous training, not just in ceremonial drills, but in discipline. Day after day, Harrison and the other guards endured tourists trying to make them laugh, taking selfies too close to their faces and making rude comments. They were trained never to react, never to speak except for official commands, never to break character. In his time as a royal guard, Harrison had seen it all, from children waving Hello Kitty toys in his face to drunk tourists pretending to march alongside him. Through it all, he had maintained his composure. His commanding officer often praised him for his discipline. "A royal guard is not a person while on duty," his training sergeant had told them. "You are a symbol of the crown's authority and tradition. Nothing breaks that, not heat, not rain, not tourists." Harrison had taken those words to heart, until today. As he approached Diane, now less than 2 feet away, something inside him shifted. Perhaps it was the way she smirked as she backed up just inches, clearly intending to jump back into his path once he passed. Maybe it was how she had ignored repeated warnings from the security staff. Or maybe it was simply one tourist too many treating his job, his uniform, and his country's traditions like a joke. Whatever the reason, Private Harrison did something unprecedented. He stopped. The crowd gasped. Royal Guards never stopped mid-march, unless it was part of the ceremony. They walked their routes with clockwork precision, never deviating, never pausing. Diane blinked in surprise, her phone still held up. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then Harrison did something even more shocking. He turned his head, breaking his forward gaze, and looked directly at Diane. The crowd's collective intake of breath was audible. Even the security officer froze, in place, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. "Madam," Harrison said, his voice quieter now but somehow more powerful than his earlier command. "The rules exist for your safety and the dignity of this ceremony." He paused, his eyes locked with Diane's stunned face. "Please step aside now." The words were simple, but the fact that he had spoken them at all, that he had broken centuries of tradition to address a tourist directly, was extraordinary. Diane stood there, mouth slightly open, phone forgotten in her hand. For once in her life, she was speechless. The security officer recovered first, gently taking her elbow. "Ma'am, please come with me behind the barrier." But Diane had found her voice again, and with it came indignation. Her cheeks flushed red, partly from embarrassment at being called out publicly, but mostly from anger at being told what to do. "How dare you speak to me like that?" she said, her voice rising. "I'm an American citizen. You can't tell me where to stand." Harrison remained perfectly still, his face once again an expressionless mask, but his eyes, which should have returned to staring straight ahead, remained fixed on Diane. "I want to speak to your supervisor immediately," she demanded, looking around as if expecting a manager to appear. This is completely unacceptable. What Diane didn't realize was that Harrison's supervisor had already been notified. Captain William Blake had been observing the changing of the guard from a distance and had witnessed the entire incident. Now he was walking briskly toward them, his face carefully controlled but his quick pace revealing his concern. By now, nearly every tourist in the vicinity had their phone pointed at the scene. This wasn't the usual palace spectacle they had come to see, but it was certainly more dramatic. "You've ruined your career," Diane said to Harrison, mistaking his silence for fear. "When I'm done complaining, you'll be lucky to have a job flipping burgers." The security officer tried again to lead her away. "Ma'am, please, don't touch me," she snapped, pulling her arm away. "I know my rights." And that's when Captain Blake arrived, his presence immediately commanding attention. The captain, a decorated officer with 15 years of service, surveyed the scene with experienced eyes. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, his voice calm but authoritative. Diane turned to him with relief. "Finally, someone in charge. This guard was incredibly rude to me. I want to file a formal complaint." Captain Blake nodded once, his face unreadable. "I see, ma'am. And you are—" "Diane Winters from Columbus, Ohio," she said promptly, straightening her designer jacket. "And I expect this situation to be handled properly." What she didn't notice was the slight narrowing of the captain's eyes, or the way 3 more security officers had quietly appeared nearby. "It will indeed be handled properly, Ms. Winters," Captain Blake said. "I can assure you of that." The crowd around them had grown. Tourists who had been watching the main ceremony now drifted over, drawn by the commotion. Phones were raised high, recording everything. Someone in the back whispered, "This is definitely going on YouTube." Captain Blake turned to Private Harrison, his voice professional but with an edge of concern. "Private, return to your post. We will discuss this later." Harrison gave a crisp nod, then resumed his forward gaze. Without another word, he continued his march, moving around Diane with mechanical precision as if the interruption had never happened. But it had happened, and everyone knew it. "You can't just walk away," Diane called after him, but Harrison didn't respond. He was back in character now, face forward, steps measured, a living statue once more. Captain Blake turned back to Diane. "Ms. Winters, I need to ask you to come with me." "Finally," she said, misunderstanding his tone. "I want to file a formal complaint against that guard. He was completely out of line speaking to me that way." The captain's expression remained neutral. "We have a process for handling all incidents at the palace. If you'll follow me, we can discuss this properly away from the crowd." Diane nodded, pleased at being treated with what she thought was special attention. She shot a smug look at the nearby tourists as the captain led her away from the barrier area. The security officer followed close behind. "Did you see how rude that guard was?" she asked Captain Blake as they walked. "I'm a paying visitor. I deserve respect." "Every visitor deserves respect," the captain agreed calmly. "Just as our traditions deserve respect." Something in his tone made Diane glance at him more carefully. "Well, yes, but he shouldn't have spoken to me like that. Private Harrison will be dealt with according to our protocols," Blake assured her as they approached a small, official-looking door at the side of the palace grounds. "Breaking character is indeed against regulations." Diane smiled triumphantly. "Good, he should be fired." The captain said nothing as he opened the door, revealing a simple office space. A desk with a computer sat in one corner, and a small table with chairs occupied the center of the room. On the wall hung photographs of various royal ceremonies, and a framed copy of the palace security protocols. "Please have a seat," Blake said, gesturing to one of the chairs. The security officer positioned himself near the door. Diane sat down, placing her designer bag on the table. "I'm glad someone here understands customer service," she said, taking out her phone. "Now, who do I speak to about compensation for this awful experience?" Captain Blake sat across from her, folding his hands on the table. "Ms. Winters, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. You're not here to receive compensation." Diane's smile faltered. "What do you mean?" "You're here because you crossed a security barrier and interfered with a ceremonial military procedure," he explained, his voice still calm but firmer now. "These actions have consequences." "Consequences?" Diane repeated, her voice rising. "I was just taking a picture." "You crossed a clearly marked barrier," Blake continued, "ignored multiple warnings from security personnel and deliberately obstructed a royal guard on duty." "It wasn't that serious," Diane protested, looking between Blake and the security. "Officer, everyone takes pictures with the guards, that's why they're there. The Queen's guards are active-duty soldiers performing an official function," Captain Blake corrected her. "They are not tourist attractions, though we understand why visitors find them interesting." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a clipboard with a form attached. "This is a notice of security violation. While Private Harrison will face a review for breaking protocol, you have violated 3 separate palace security regulations." Diane's face flushed red. "This is ridiculous. I'm an American citizen." "Your nationality doesn't exempt you from following the rules while visiting other countries," Blake said, his patience clearly practiced. "In fact, as the security officer explained to you multiple times, these rules exist for everyone's safety." "I want to call the American embassy," Diane demanded, reaching for her phone. "This is harassment." "You're welcome to contact your embassy," Blake agreed, pushing a landline phone toward her. "However, I should inform you that interfering with ceremonial guards is taken quite seriously. The penalty usually involves a fine." "A fine?" Diane's voice cracked. "You're going to make me pay money for taking a picture?" "For crossing a security barrier and obstructing a ceremonial route despite multiple warnings," Blake corrected. "The standard fine is £200. £200? That's like—" Diane quickly calculated in her head. "Almost $300. For stepping over a rope?" "For creating a security incident," Blake said. He slid a pamphlet across the table. "Here's information about the appeal process if you wish to contest the fine." Diane stared at the pamphlet, then at Blake, then at the security officer by the door. The reality of her situation was finally sinking in. She wasn't getting an apology. She was getting punished. "This is a complete overreaction," she said, her voice quieter now but still defiant. "I wasn't hurting anyone. Ms. Winters, Blake leaned forward slightly. The rules at Royal Properties aren't suggestions, they're requirements. Private Harrison will face disciplinary action for breaking character, regardless of how justified it might have seemed to onlookers. This caught Diane's attention. He'll be punished too? Yes, Blake nodded. Breaking character, even to address a security concern, is against protocol. He knows this. For the first time since arriving at the palace, Diane felt a twinge of something, close to regret. Not quite for her actions, she wasn't ready to admit she was wrong, but for the consequences facing the guard. I didn't know he would get in trouble, she said. Every action has consequences, Blake replied simply. His and yours. Outside the office, the sounds of the continuing ceremony could be faintly heard. Life at Buckingham Palace was moving on, the incident already becoming yesterday's news for most visitors. But for Diane, sitting in this small office with a fine notice in front of her, the day had taken an unexpected turn. What happens if I don't pay the fine? She asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. It would be recorded as an unresolved security violation, Blake explained. It could potentially affect future visits to the UK. Diane's planned trip included 3 more days in London, followed by a weekend in Paris. The last thing she needed was trouble with immigration officials. She sighed heavily and reached for her purse. Fine. Do you take credit cards? Captain Blake nodded, sliding a payment form toward her. Yes, we do. As Diane reluctantly filled out the form, she noticed a small monitor on the desk showing security camera feeds from around the palace grounds. On one screen, she could see the spot where she had confronted Harrison. Tourists were still gathering, there pointing and taking pictures of nothing in particular now, just the place where something interesting had happened. Those people are probably all watching the videos of me online already, she muttered. Captain Blake didn't confirm or deny this, but the slight tightening of his jaw suggested she was right. What neither of them knew was just how viral those videos were about to become. By the time Diane left the palace security office, 2 hours had passed. Her credit card was $200 lighter, and her pride had taken an even bigger hit. Outside, the crowds had moved on to other attractions. The changing of the guard was long over. She checked her phone as she walked through the palace gates. Elaine. Missed calls from her tour group leader, wondering where she'd disappeared to. But what caught her eye were the notifications. Dozens of them, flooding her social media accounts. What in the world? She muttered, opening the first one. It was a comment on her latest vacation photo posted yesterday at Big Ben. But the comment had nothing to do with the famous clock tower. Aren't you the lady who blocked the Royal Guard? OMG! Diane's stomach tightened. She opened another notification. And another. They were all the same. People asking if she was the woman from the viral video. With shaking fingers, she opened her social media feed and saw it immediately. Someone had posted a video titled "Entitled Tourist versus Royal Guard. You won't believe what happens." It already had over 100,000 views, and the count was climbing by the minute. Diane stopped walking, nearly causing a collision with the tourists behind her. She pressed play on the video. There she was, in high definition, ducking under the rope barrier. The video showed everything, her pushing to the front, ignoring the security officer's warnings, standing in the guard's path. It captured the moment Harrison broke protocol to speak to her, and her angry reaction afterward. But worst of all were the comments. Classic Karen behavior. The guard deserves a medal for keeping his cool so long. Who goes to another country and disrespects their traditions like this? Diane quickly closed the app, her face burning. This couldn't be happening. She was supposed to be enjoying a relaxing vacation, not becoming internet famous for all the wrong reasons. Her phone rang. Her tour guide again. With a sigh, she answered. Diane, where have you been? The group left for lunch an hour ago. I had some trouble at the palace, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I'll catch up with everyone at the hotel later. Trouble? What kind of trouble? It's nothing, Diane said quickly. Just a misunderstanding. But it wasn't nothing, and it wasn't just a misunderstanding. As Diane made her way back to her hotel alone, She felt eyes on her. A group of teenagers pointed and whispered as she passed. An older couple gave her disapproving looks. It can't be, she thought. They couldn't all have seen the video already. But they had. By the time Diane reached her hotel room, the video had been picked up by news sites. American tourist causes. Royal Guard to break century-old protocol, read one headline. Palace incident goes viral. Guard speaks out after tourist blocks path, read another. Diane sat on the edge of her hotel bed, scrolling through the stories in disbelief. This wasn't how her London trip was supposed to go. She'd planned to post beautiful photos, make her friends back home jealous, maybe even boost her social media following. Instead, she had become the latest internet villain. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister back in Ohio. Please tell me that's not you in that palace video everyone's sharing. Diane didn't reply. What could she say? It was clearly her, and the whole world seemed to know it. Meanwhile, across London at the military barracks, Private James Harrison sat in his commanding officer's office, his red uniform replaced by standard army fatigues. The atmosphere was tense as Captain Blake reviewed the incident report. You understand the seriousness of breaking protocol, Private? Blake asked, his tone more disappointed than angry. Yes, sir, Harrison replied, sitting straight-backed in his chair. I take full responsibility for my actions. Blake sighed, setting down the report. 4 years of service, 18 months as a Royal Guard without a single incident. Then this. No excuses, sir. I'm not asking for excuses, Harrison. I'm trying to understand why today, after all the tourists you've dealt with, you chose to break character. Harrison paused, considering his words carefully. Something felt different. Sir, she wasn't just taking photos like the others. She was deliberately ignoring the rules after multiple warnings. It felt like a matter of respect. Not just for me, but for what the uniform represents. Blake nodded slowly. The video's everywhere, you know. Someone even sent it to the colonel. Harrison's face remained impassive, but his shoulders tensed slightly. The colonel's opinion could determine his future in the Guards. And? Harrison asked finally. And, Blake said, leaning back in his chair. He has concerns about the precedent this sets, but he also understands the unique circumstances. He slid a document across the desk to Harrison. Your official reprimand, 3 days of additional duties and a note in your file. Harrison looked up, surprised. That's all, sir? The colonel feels, and I agree, that while you broke protocol, you did so in a way that maintained dignity. You didn't yell or act unprofessionally. You were firm but respectful. Harrison accepted the document with a nod. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, Blake said, a hint of a smile crossing his face. Those additional duties include reviewing visitor barrier protocols with the security team. The colonel thinks your unique perspective might be valuable. As Harrison left the office, relieved but still processing the day's events, he had no idea that his name was trending online. People were calling him the guard who finally spoke up and praising his calm handling of the situation. 3 days. Later, as autumn leaves began to fall across London, new signs appeared near the guard stations at Buckingham Palace. They were larger, with clearer warnings about staying behind barriers. At the bottom, in slightly smaller print, was a new addition. The Queen's Guard are active duty soldiers performing an official function. Obstruction is a prosecutable offense. Back in Columbus, Ohio, Diane returned to work after her vacation. She had deleted most of her social media accounts after the barrage of negative comments became too much to bear. Her co-workers had seen the video, of course everyone had, but after a few days of uncomfortable jokes, they mostly let it drop. One evening, as she cleaned out her suitcase from the trip, Diane found the palace security violation notice she had crumpled and stuffed into a side pocket. She started to throw it away but stopped herself. Instead, she smoothed it out and looked at it for a long moment. Then, surprising herself, she took a thumbtack and pinned it to her home office bulletin board. "What are you doing?" her roommate asked, passing by the door. Diane shrugged. "Keeping a reminder, I guess. Of your 15 minutes of fame?" her roommate teased. Of something I learned, Diane replied more seriously than her roommate expected. Sometimes the rules are there for a reason, even if I don't like them. She didn't add that she'd found herself thinking about the guard more often than she wanted to admit, not in anger anymore, but with a grudging respect. He had done his job, even when it was hard, even when it got him in trouble. 6 months later, when a coworker announced plans to visit London, Diane surprised everyone by offering travel tips, real helpful advice, not complaints. And whatever you do, she added with a self-deprecating smile, stay behind the ropes at Buckingham Palace, trust me on that one. Her coworkers laughed, and for the first time since the incident, Diane laughed with them. The story of her London disaster had somehow, over time, transformed from her most embarrassing moment into a funny anecdote she could tell at parties, a story about the time she learned, very publicly, that some traditions are worth respecting. And halfway across the world, Lance Corporal James Harrison, recently promoted, still stood guard at Buckingham Palace, his face as impassive as ever. Tourists still took photos, still waved, still tried occasionally to make him smile. But now they stayed carefully behind the barriers,